Good morning, friends and enemies. It is Tuesday morning, which means we are coming back to your face holes with the waiver wire for week 5. All right, we're going to go through every single player on the trending up tab, every single player on the trending down tab, tell you who is my priority pickups for the week, as well as dudes that I'd be dropping from your fantasy rosters for the time being. As always, my waiver wire rankings will be live by the time you watch this video. They're up there on BDGE.co for the big dog members. That'll tell you exactly how much fab I would spend personally on each of these players and exactly how I would rank them in numerical, neatly sorted order for y'all. Let's jump in. All right, let's start with the running back position here. First name on the list is Kenneth Gainwell. We saw Jalen Warren as a pretty random surprise inactive. He was like unhealthy most of the week, but still practicing, and they said they expected him to play. And then all of a sudden, 8 a.m. hits, he's an inactive, which means the game in Dublin runs through Kenny Gainwell. All right, Kenny Gainwell had a career day. Overall, here's how I'm looking at the situation. Big day, obviously, over 120 yards from scrimmage, a couple touchdowns here. So if you had him in your lineup, if you use him as a spot start, good for you. You probably squeeze most of the juice that you're going to get out of Kenneth Gainwell this year. So first thing to note here is Pittsburgh is on a bye in week 5. So is Atlanta, Chicago, and Green Bay. So it's important to know the bye week stuff, not only because obviously your players who are on those teams are not going to play in week 5 and you need to find substitutes for them if they're starters. But secondly, it also makes the impact of picking up these players less valuable because you're not going to be able to use them in week 5. And a lot of the reasons that they're probably valuable for your rosters is because somebody got injured, which gives them ample time to get ready. This is the perfect scenario for that. Jalen Warren out, probably close to playing. Kenneth Gainwell filled in well, but because they have a week 5 bye, it's expected that Warren's going to be back for week 6 when they do return to the field. Now, basically, what I do think is this probably boosts a little bit of the trust for Kenneth Gainwell among the coaching staff, and he probably gets a little bit more work. It doesn't make me excited about Kenneth Gainwell for fantasy. What it does is probably hampers the ceiling a little bit of Jalen Warren. I think he's played great up to this point. He's obviously a tremendous player in that backfield, but I do think from a running style standpoint, he's a little bit smaller and he tries to run like Cam Scatable all the time. And I do think they'll probably share the running workload a little bit more going forward. We also saw Caleb Johnson get some work. I'm not trying to pick him up, but he did some positive things for like the first time this year. So it's possible going forward, instead of getting 0 snaps, Caleb Johnson now gets, 8, 12, 15% of the snaps, which makes it even more murkier. So overall, this game does not make me like want to go out and spend a lot of money on Kenneth Gainwell. He should be owned because he's clearly a high-end handcuff, but there are a ton of high-end handcuffs that you can kind of play whack-a-mole with in this league. There will be games, I'm sure, where Kenneth Gainwell maybe gets into the end zone or catches 4 or 5 passes and usable, but you're never going to be able to predict those, and Warren's still the guy for me. So overall, the situation just hampers Warren's ceiling, in my opinion, over the long run, because Kenneth Gainwell probably, built up a little bit more trust with the coaching staff. Justice Hill, I mean, how long do you have to play fantasy football to know that like Justice Hill is not a good pickup? I get it, all the narratives around their defense being terrible, game script, et cetera, et cetera. It's Justice Hill. He has one good game every 7 weeks, then you pick him up, and then he does nothing for 5 weeks, and then everyone wants to pick him up after his next good game. We're not even talking about him here. The next player up on this list is Woody Marks, the rookie running back for the Houston Texans. Now, he's someone that we marked on the waiver wire list last week, so I hope that you picked him up and stash him because he should have been owned in any serious league. Up to this point, if he's not, you're going to have to drop the bag to get him because he will be the number 1 waiver wire pickup for pretty much every fantasy league in week 5. He is the golden egg here. Now, the trajectory of Woody Marks went from barely playing in week 1 to now being the 1A in this backfield to Nick Chubb, right? It's incrementally increased his snap count over the 4 weeks, 11 to 27 to 48. This week was the first time that we saw him take the lion's share of the snaps, and he played really well. 17 for 69 on the ground, plus a touchdown, 5 targets, 4 catches, 50 yards, plus another touchdown through the air. Looked good, was running smoothly. He's obviously a really good pass catcher. He was a guy that played in Mike Leach's offense back in college for a bit, caught a ton of passes. So that's his strong suit. As for the ground game, they played against Tennessee, so I don't want us to get over our skis and expect like a crazy top 15, top 12 type of running back for the rest of the season. But I do think Woody Marks looks like he's probably going to be the 1A to the 1B in this backfield that badly needed some juice, right? Darren is not playing at all. Dameon Pierce is a healthy scratch at this point. So it's just Marks and it's just Nick Chubb. And I think you could look at this like it's easy to say, oh, he's the next Bucky Irving. And I don't necessarily disagree, but I think the Houston Texans are in much worse shape than the Bucs were. And I also think Rachaad White was a much better player, or is a much better suited player next to Bucky Irving than Nick Chubb is. So I do think there's positives and negatives for Woody Marks going forward. I think there's going to be a little bit of overhype because they played Tennessee, but ultimately I think the role feels really secure and probably only has up to go from here. I think Woody Marks is probably going to be ranked as a borderline RB2 almost weekly going forward right now. I don't think Nick Chubb is going to disappear from the backfield. I still think they're going to give him a decent amount of base down work, first and second downs. And I don't think Woody Marks' role is going to be complete monopolization on the goal line. I think on any given week, any given series, that's going to be split still between Nick Chubb and Woody Marks. And even that, I almost feel like they're probably going to give most of those like carries inside the 1, 2, or 3 yard line to Nick Chubb. I think Woody Marks can get involved when they're inside the 10-yard line when they need a little bit more of a spatial back who could make guys miss in space. And I think that's typically what you'll see from a guy like Woody Marks. So Marks, I think, will just continue to see his workload increase. And I think with Marks, that's a guy that if you need running back help, which like who fucking doesn't in fantasy all the time, he's a dude that I'm blowing the fab on, right? Like if you could read your league, right, and you think you only need to spend 40% of fab, great. If you need to go up to 60, 70, 80%, I have no problem with that. The one thing I will splash a little water on here is they have a tough matchup over the next like 5 or 6 weeks. At Baltimore, obviously that run defense has looked atrocious with all the injuries, so I won't, mark them as a tough matchup at this point. They get a bye week in week 6 at Seattle, San Fran, Denver, so that's a streak of 3 games that is pretty damn difficult. But when you get deeper into the playoffs, Arizona, Las Vegas, the Chargers, I mean, those games can kind of swing either way, but fantasy playoffs, that's not exactly a brutal schedule. So Woody Marks for sure the number 1 waiver wire pickup this week. Zavier Scott, I'm not really into him, but he's just a backup to Jordan Mason. Aaron Jones will be back soon. He had a big week and will probably play a little bit of a passing down role here, but no way that you actually stash him on your team and start him. Kendre Miller's interesting from the standpoint that he actually looked great on Sunday. 11 carries, 65 yards, got the touchdown. Alvin Kamara's kind of transformed into like barely an RB2 at this point. He's not really catching passes, and I would say Kendre's looked better than Alvin Kamara has. Kendre Miller was a really interesting prospect out of TCU. He was a day 2 pick for the Saints, and he's had like a really weird start to his career where he hasn't played well, and then the coaching staff, like, I remember last year they were saying he was injured, and then he would get interviewed, and he'd be like, I'm fine, I don't know what's going on here. New coaching staff, obviously, they're getting him more involved. The snap split, 31% to Alvin Kamara's 65, 67%. It's still very wide, and Kamara to me is still the guy, but I mean, Kendre is really chewing out a legit role. The problem is his role is an early down role. The problem is his role is just rushing. The problem is his role is carries, and that's just not going to be a game script that the Saints get to enjoy often. Like, they kind of kept themselves within this game for the Buffalo Bills, which is, surprising. And it's not like they have a brutal schedule whatsoever. They get the Giants next week, the Patriots the week after that, Chicago, Tampa Bay. The Rams is tough, obviously, Carolina, but then Atlanta. They actually have, holy shit, their schedule is so soft. I think with Kendre, the other interesting piece could be the fact that like this is a team that's really bad, obviously, and they're not going to have any playoff aspirations. Does Alvin Kamara get moved, at the trade deadline? Does a team that really needs a running back throw, a 5th or 6th round pick for Alvin Kamara? Does Alvin Kamara have like a non-serious, really ankle injury towards the end of the year, and they just shut him down for the remainder of the year? Like, couldn't you see Kendre Miller being the guy when you look back? Like, remember when Kendre Miller won me my fantasy championship in 2025? I don't think it's out of the realm of possibilities. I do think you're going to have to wait quite a while, or something drastic has to change, like a materialistic change in that backfield. Kamara getting hurt, Kamara getting moved, for Kendre Miller to be a guy that you actually want to throw into your lineup, just because this team is not going to have a ton of scoring opportunities. And I think that's where Kendre Miller's upside kind of lies. But ultimately, I do think he's a pretty sharp pickup right now and should be owned in most leagues. Rachaad White's probably owned everywhere, but there was some news yesterday that Bucky Irving could be a little bit banged up. He did hurt his ankle in this game, and he ended up finishing it. But you see that with a lot of ankle sprains, where guys twist it, and then because the adrenaline is so high, they're able to play through it, and then it really swells up the next couple of days. So there's a possibility that Bucky misses some time, and Rachaad White would be a great fill-in. Brashard Smith is definitely a guy I want to talk about. Rookie, day 3 pick out of SMU. He was one of our favorite prospects to highlight throughout the Dynasty Channel offseason. He is, a little bit undersized, under 200 pounds, but he is really explosive, and he was a wide receiver converted running back. So he brings a piece to this offense that they don't have there, right? Pacheco and Hunt are just early down guys that have shown like nothing so far this season, and there was a little bit of movement for Brashard Smith, right? It's small, but it was a season high in terms of snap counts, 26%. Season high in rushing attempts. He got 4 of them, and a season high with 4 targets. He only ran 10 routes, but that was not too far behind Pacheco and Kareem Hunt. And 4 targets on 10 routes is a really, really high, target per route run rate. And what that tells me is when he is running the routes, they are scheming up touches and scheming up plays for him. Andy Reid also came out and said Matt Nagy is going to continue to try to get Brashard Smith more and more involved. So these are the storylines that you want to look out for rookies, right? Like, this is the Woody Marks storyline. This is those types of storylines where, of course, it doesn't always hit, but like, the hints and the clues are right in front of our face. Brashard Smith he's one of those clues. So pick him up, see how the next 2, 3, 4 weeks plays out, be patient, and we might have what Jerick McKinnon was in this offense a few years ago. He was really useful in PPR leagues, catching a ton of passes, playing all the passing down work, ended up scoring like 8 touchdowns with Mahomes. I also think, again, this could be a Woody Mark situation where if Brashard Smith gets to the point where he's playing on 30, 40, 45% of snaps, and they choose to eventually phase either Kareem Hunt or Isaiah Pacheco out of the offense for the favor of a much more explosive rookie, high upside running back here with Brashard Smith. Like we saw their offense transform a little bit in week 4 to a more explosive offense with Xavier Worthy. That's going to compound once Rashee Rice is back. And I do think this offense is going to start clicking a little bit more. And Brashard Smith could be one of those guys here. So he's definitely one to stash at the end of your bench. You're not going to be able to play him, unfortunately. So it might get a little bit more difficult as these bye weeks roll around. But I do think he's someone that could end up being like the number 1 guy on a waiver wire video in the upcoming weeks. Chris Rodriguez in Washington, I have no different opinion than I've had pretty much for the last month or so in the backfield. Would still prefer Ja'Cory Krosky-Moret, but they're all splitting snaps almost identically, 40% across the board. Rodriguez is starting, getting a lot of carries. JCM's usually matching him with carries, and McNichols is playing basically all the long down and distance and passing down work. Realistically, between Rodriguez and Ja'Cory Krosky-Moret, it kind of comes down to like they're splitting series, right? It's like Rodriguez is going to play this entire series and JCM is going to play the next one. And whoever kind of gets lucky and has a series where they end up inside the 5-yard line is going to get those goal line carries. So there's just no predictability in that backfield. Those opportunities will be a little bit more, fruitful when Jaden Daniels is back on the field. So like take that for whatever you want. But I mean, all of them are just like RB4s right now that you can't play unless you're really desperate. And then outside of that, I mean, you have all of the normal high-end handcuff guys. You got the Brian Robinsons, you got Ollie Gordon, you got DJ Giddens, you have whatever, the same names that we've been talking about all year. Moving to the wide receivers. So a few names that we definitely need to talk about on this list because you got Malik Neighbors going down. So we're choosing between Darius Slayton and Wan'Dale Robinson in the New York Giants passing core. The first thing I will say is like Jackson Dart is such a runner of the football that the passing volume is probably going to be low, right? He had 10 carries last week, which not all those are designed. Obviously, some of them will be designed because he is an athlete, but like normally it's 2, 3, maybe 4 plays that are designed to be runs, which means the other 6 or 7 should be dropbacks, but end up turning into rushing numbers, which I think is going to be the case going forward. So instead of him throwing 30 times, he's really throwing 22 or 23 times a game, which hurts, everybody in the passing offense. With Malik Neighbors out though, like the targets have to go somewhere, and it's pretty much going to be Wan'Dale Robinson and Darius Slayton. You could throw Theo Johnson in there if you want to. I think he's a very, very desperate play. I would prefer Wan'Dale Robinson to Darius Slayton, especially in PPR leagues. I think he's going to have a really, really high target floor. I think Darius Slayton is a fine borderline wide receiver 3-4 play that will have his spike weeks if he catches a long pass or turns into more of a possession receiver. We did see that with Daniel Jones last year in the 2 games that Malik Neighbors missed. Darius Slayton actually performed really, really well, almost 18 fantasy points per game in PPR leagues. So like very small sample size, completely different quarterback. So I don't want to get out over our skis. Like I think we know what Darius Slayton is. He's a cool player, right? He's like almost like the guy below him, Romeo Dobbs, in a sense where he's like a decent downfield threat and a decent possession receiver. The targets obviously open up and he needs to be owned. And I do think I would spend, if I needed a wide receiver, a decent chunk of fab on both Slayton and Wan'Dale Robinson, but my preference is Wan'Dale, then Slayton. Might be a little bit of a shift if you're half PPR or standard, because I do think Slayton might have a little bit more like touchdown equity. But again, I think this is going to be an offense that is super run heavy because Cam Scatterbo just got 25 carries. Devin Singletary got another handful of carries. Jackson Dart's carrying the ball 10 times. So I think we're going to see a pass rate that's really, really low relative to other teams around the league, which is going to be hard for guys like Wan'Dale or Slayton to really get home if they're only getting 5, 6, 7 targets. Target share is going to be very, very high though. So speaking of more injuries, we had Tyreek Hill cracked his whole shit last night on Monday Night Football. He's going to be out for the year, if not, the rest of his career at this point. What I think plays out in Miami, this is how I'm seeing the situation. I think with Darren Waller being back in the fold, they go very, very 2 tight end heavy set, very 12 personnel heavy in that offense. They'll use a blocking tight end and then Darren Waller is like an inside weapon. Tyreek Hill is such a unique player that you obviously can't replace him, right? There's no one that's in their receiver group that could just run his routes. This obviously means like the biggest beneficiary is Jalen Waddle by a bajillion. Anyone who had Jalen Waddle got very, very lucky because he's a bad fantasy player pretty much. And now he's probably going to get somewhere from 8 to 10 targets per game. Behind him on the depth chart is Malik Washington here. And they probably don't even have the other guy, Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, who they signed this offseason. Malik Washington is not a well-rounded route runner. He's a slot guy. His ADOT on the year is about 4 yards downfield. So I'm not overly excited about him. I think what this does mean is it's going to be an elevated floor. He'll get a few more targets per game. I think they'll have more design touches to him each game, which of course elevates the floor again, but he's not a ceiling player. I think he'll have a share of 6 for 60 games or whatever, but going to be very hard to depend on him on a weekly basis. Like he's a bad version of Wan'Dale Robinson right now, in my opinion, and they already have Jalen Waddle ahead of him. Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, on the other hand, is an ex-wide receiver. He's an outside guy. And what I think will end up happening is this. They're going to run a ton of 12 personnel. And then depending on where Waddle kind of lines up, or if they use Darren Waller in like a bunch formation, if Waddle is a guy who in that particular play is running from the slot or he's running inside routes, which is, again, kind of difficult for 12 personnel because you got 2 tight ends, but I think Waller is going to operate more as a wide receiver. Then it will dictate a rotation of snaps between Malik and Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. Like if Waddle's more of an inside receiver on that play, NWI is probably going to be playing. If he's more on the outside and running, vertical routes or something like that, then we'll probably see a little bit more of Malik Washington. But it's going to be a nightmare to try to predict on a week-to-week basis which of those guys you want to be rostering. And to me, it's just not a passing offense that I want to be investing into. If you got Jalen Waddle, congrats. You got a huge dub last night with the injury. And then there's Darren Waller, who I'll kind of just jump over to Darren Waller just because we're in the middle of that conversation. Darren Waller, I'm very, very intrigued by, right? We saw his first game last night since 2023. And actually at the end of our game-by-game recap live stream yesterday, if you don't already subscribe and have notifications on, every Monday, we go through every single game and talk about everything fantasy relevant. There was a question at the end of the live stream, was like, what are your thoughts on Darren Waller? Should I pick him up? And my response was, yeah, if you got room, I kind of like Waller. Like this is, almost verbatim, quote unquote. I like Waller tonight if you have room to add him, because if he ends up going for 30 yards and a touchdown, he's going to be a waiver wire pickup. I am skeptical that he plays more than like 30% of the snaps in this one. And, you guys all watched the game. He played around 30% of the snaps. It's not here, but he played 36% of the snaps, went 3 for 27, caught 2 touchdowns. So almost verbatim, the way I explained it is what actually happened. Does that always happen? Almost literally never. But this one happened. Now you're probably hyped that you got Darren Waller on your bench. And it's like he played well, right? And the way I look at this Miami team now, with the Tyreek Hill injury, Darren Waller is going to have to play a huge role. And even prior to the Tyreek Hill injury, they don't really have red zone weapons. Like they don't have guys that you can consistently target in the end zone and go up and make a play. Like Tyreek Hill gets open because he's small and he's really shifty and fast, obviously. But outside of that, they don't have, like Tua doesn't have a guy that he can trust. And Darren Waller just became that overnight for them. So I wouldn't be surprised if going forward, Darren Waller gets legitimately like 40 to 50% of all of the end zone targets when they're down there. Again, though, it's important to take everything with a grain of salt when you're playing against defenses like the New York Jets. So the Miami Dolphins are not going to live down there when they don't have Tyreek Hill anymore. It's going to be a much worse offense. But I think Darren Waller, he acclimates more and more back to being in game speed, gets more conditioned. Like he might become an every down player and be a top 10 fantasy tight end going forward. He is someone that if I don't have a real fantasy tight end right now in my lineup, I would splurge to get him. I really would. So that's kind of my take on Miami right now. If I'm ranking them, it's Waddle was a huge winner. Waller's the guy I want on the waiver wire. And then it's like probably Malik and then NWI all the way down here. Luke McCaffrey, yeah, I mean, he strung together a couple of usable weeks because of touchdowns, but he's still only playing about 30% of the snaps, and that is with Terry McLaurin out. So Terry McLaurin is expected to be back, I think, relatively soon. So he's not a guy I'm using a roster spot on. Let's talk about Isaiah Bond, which we did in the live stream recap yesterday. But Isaiah Bond's a really interesting add to me, mainly because Cedric Tillman is now out and week to week with his hamstring strain, similar to, again, Woody Marks. Isaiah Bond, his snap count, well, the snap count didn't go up last week, but the routes run actually did. And I think I pulled up the tweet that I posted yesterday. His routes run, per snap back each week has gone up and up and up and up. And now with Cedric Tillman out, I do expect him to be the second receiver behind Jerry Jeudy. And Joe Flacco right now is second in the NFL in pass attempts. Isaiah Bond was widely looked at as a day 2 pick for the NFL draft this year. Rookie out of University of Texas, absolute speedster. In Sunday's game, he was averaging over 19 yards per reception. And I think as Judy plays like the intermediate routes, I think Bond will probably get some shots deep where Hal Fannin and David Njoku and those types of receivers are more possession, in between 5 and 15 yards down the field. Bond's going to be the guy who spreads the defense and I think does get some shots down the field in one of the most pass-heavy offenses so far. So widely looked at as a day 2 prospect before all the off the field issues, which obviously left him undrafted and then ended up getting picked up by the Cleveland Browns. And now he's basically the wide receiver 2 on their roster. So again, where all the clues and the hints are pointing towards a rookie starting to get more involved in their offense, these are the types of guys you want to stash. Like, you don't want to waste roster spots on Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. You don't want to waste roster spots on like handcuffs if you already have 1 or 2 of them on your bench. Like, you want to use roster spots on guys who have a 0 floor, but have a high ceiling. You want to go get the Isaiah Bonds. You want to stash the Woody Marks. You want to stash these guys who we don't actually know who they are yet. And that leaves the room for them having huge impacts down the stretch on your roster. So Bond didn't have like a massive day. It was 3 for 58 on 6 targets, which was, I think, second on the team. So I don't think you're going to have to spend a lot to get him. And it's not like I think he's going to be a huge target volume guy going forward. But in 12-team leagues or 14-team leagues, he's definitely a guy that I think is worth stashing on your bench. With the Dallas group right now, we've got CeeDee Lamb still dealing with the ankle injury, but it's clear that it's mainly Pickens and Ferguson. I don't really look at Dallas, again, much different than this is actually a great comp to Miami, where Tolbert's like Nick Westbrook-Ikhine and Kavonte Turpin is like Malik Washington, where it's like CeeDee Lamb's out. Like, sure, there's going to be more design targets to Kavonte Turpin each week, but it's like 1 to 2 that probably turn into 12 yards and it does nothing useful for you. Jalen Tolbert, he's going to run all the routes. He had 61 yards in this one, thanks mostly to that overtime catch that was like more than half of his yards. So not predictable. They do have some good matchups coming up. The Jets, Carolina, Washington. I do expect CeeDee Lamb to be back probably by week 7. So not another guy that I really want to stash on my bench, to be honest. I think that's really it for running backs and wide receivers. Obviously, if Dobbs is available, I still think Troy Franklin's a really strong hold right now. He's running all of the routes out there. It's kind of been disappointing, obviously, since the big like week 2 breakout. But you can do much worse than the guy who's running 90% of the routes in that offense. For tight ends, I mean, Darren Waller's without a doubt the number 1 pickup this week. I think Tommy Tremble's a little bit interesting because Jatavian Sanders still dealing with a high ankle sprain. Xavier Legette is still out with the hamstring strain. Jalen Coker eligible to return this week, but Dave Canales came out yesterday and said that he's still week to week. So I'm going to have to wait a little bit longer for Jalen Coker. In the meantime, Tommy Tremble's probably going to get some targets because Bryce Young does like throwing to the tight end position. Theo Johnson, I mean, you can make the case for because Malik Neighbors is out. Jake Tonges is the other one that I think is a little bit interesting. They play on Thursday Night Football, the San Francisco 49ers. Kittle's still out. They might be without Juwan Jennings. They might be without Ricky Pearsall. They're definitely without Brandon Ayuk right now. So they have like no pass catching targets outside of Christian McCaffrey if all those guys miss. And Jake Tonges, I think, has filled in admirably so far for George Kittle. So I think there's a world where if you're really desperate, you need to stream tight end Jake Tonges against the Rams on Thursday Night Football. Could be worse. I'd like to throw Cole Kmet on this list because he had a big game on Sunday and Colson Loveland missed with a hip injury, but they do have their week 5 bye. So I do expect by week 6 coming around, Loveland probably will be healthy. And then that puts Cole Kmet back into like a 60-35, 60-40 split rather than like the 80 to 90% route runner that he was on Sunday. So a lot less appealing. Plus you also need to, hold a roster spot the entire time for him. For streaming defenses, as always, we're looking for teams that are at home, that are favored to win their games and are, just heavy favorites. The more heavy they are, the better. The opposing offenses, the more banged up they are, their quarterbacks, whatever, those are the teams you want to target. I like the Arizona Cardinals at home versus Tennessee Titans for obvious reasons. The Rams at home versus the Niners if they're somehow available. Obviously extremely banged up on the Niners offensive side of the ball. I like the Colts versus the Las Vegas Raiders as well. And then the Detroit Lions, which are the only team away, but against Cincinnati, we like that defense as a streamer too. Like I said at the beginning of the video, if you want my exact rankings for all these positions, as well as the overall flex rankings, all of them kind of mushed together, plus the fab suggestions for them, you can go find them at bdge.co. If you sign up to be a Big Dog member, you get the waiver wire rankings. You will get my weekly rankings for sit start, and you will get access to my private Q&A sit start stream every Saturday morning. So BDGE.co, go sign up for that. Moving over quickly to the drop list. Yep, you can drop Malik Neighbors, unfortunately. Tyreek Hill, unfortunately. Calvin Austin, I think, hurt his shoulder. Like he's another one where it's like if you've played fantasy for more than a year or two, Calvin Austin, Justice Hill, all these guys are the same. Like I don't know why we're spending fab on them. I don't know why we continue to just do this over and over again. Tyquan Thornton, he's been too good, man. I kind of think they're going to continue using him. Like, I kind of think when Rashee Rice is back, it's going to be Rice and Hollywood underneath, and Tyquan's still going to be a deep threat. Like, it's really hard to start him, obviously, just because the nature of who he is as a player and his skill set comes with a very low floor. Honestly, I think I'm going to hold on to him. Darnell Mooney suffered a hamstring strain, which is probably going to sideline him for, it's probably going to be week to week right now. So, not a player I want to drop by any means, but I get it, you know, tough times, bye weeks, all that kind of stuff. Like, if you have to, you can. Trey Tucker is definitely a guy I would hold on to. We've seen the spike weeks already. He's still running every route. Would not drop. Bashal Tootin, Dylan Sampson, definitely droppable. Sterling Shepard, I mean, you know, there's no surprise here. We were very skeptical about picking him up in the first place. At Seattle now, like Evan's going to be back soon. Chris Godwin ran almost every single route. So Sterling Shepard's definitely not a guy you need to keep on your roster. Ramondre, definitely do not drop. Johnny Smith is definitely droppable. They're on a bye, and I don't think he's top 30 receiving yards yet this year. Zach Ertz, definitely hold on to. Evan Ingram's been droppable. Harold Fannin, definitely do not drop. I think he's going to be a big beneficiary of Cedric Tillman getting hurt. Chris Rodriguez, you already know how I feel about him. I don't care if you hold on to him. You can, you can't. I don't care. Ollie Gordon would hold if you have a spot for a high-end handcuff. Luther Burden would probably hold too, but it is bye weeks. I think he's probably one of the first guys to get dropped off of your team if you need a spot. Calvin Ridley, I mean, the run out is brutal right now. I'd like to say I think the Titans are going to get better eventually, but I don't know that I could say that confidently. But at the end of the day, if Calvin Ridley's on my team, I'm not dropping him, but like, I get it. Corum, high-end handcuff. Tillman, probably droppable if you need the spot. And Njoku, I'm not going to drop. Really hard to play, and I would rather own Fannin than Njoku, and I think that's kind of been the case since week one. But again, I think everybody kind of benefits from Cedric Tillman's hamstring injury. Braylon Allen tweaked his knee last night, and it could be something that's week to week. So he might very well end up being droppable. Brian Robinson, definitely hold on to with the workload that C-Mac is getting. Parker Washington, yeah, I mean, you're kind of a fucking idiot if you played him last week. Dami Brown should be back in just the Jaguars offense right now. Keon Coleman, do not drop. Kyle Mononga's a handcuff. Son Haskins, you could drop. Torrey Horton's another guy that I still want to stash. Rico Dowdle's just a handcuff. Tank Bigsby, definitely droppable. Kavonte Turpin, again, is just Malik Washington. You're never going to be able to start him. Josh Downs, man, I hate where he's at right now. He's still just playing on 50 to 60% of the snaps, not seeing any real targets here. I want to say better days are ahead, but again, I cannot say that confidently, unfortunately. If I have Josh Downs, again, I'm probably not dropping him. Him and Cooper Kupp and Troy Franklin are all kind of in the same tier. Where, listen, when bye weeks hit, I do think they're fine plays to throw into your lineup and just hope they have nice floor games, but I get it. I do. Isaac Tesla for show droppable. That's going to be this week's waiver wire week 5. You can go get the rankings on BDGE.co. If you're not subscribed yet, we will be coming out with the running back rankings video game by game, every fantasy relevant player tomorrow, and then wide receivers on Thursday, Q&A live stream on Saturday. All right, all that sheesh for the rest of the week, as well as for the rest of every single week of this fantasy season and every fantasy season going forward for the rest of your lives. You might as well subscribe now. You're going to eventually do it. All right, love y'all. Smoochies. Goodbye.